When most people think of pirates, they imagine swaggering rogues in flowing shirts with tricorn hats perched on their heads, gold earrings gleaming, scarves tied around their waists. They picture figures draped in exotic stolen silks, chests crisscrossed with pistols, cutlasses at their sides. This romantic vision, inherited from adventure novels and films, is so ingrained in our culture that we cannot see a pirate without imagining this costume. Yet, like most things about piracy in popular culture, the reality was far more mundane than fiction suggests. Pirates dressed like seamen because they were seamen. The clothes they wore aboard ship were not designed to look imposing. They were designed to work, to climb rigging, to haul lines, to survive months at sea without fresh water or comfort. Understanding what pirates actually wore requires setting aside Hollywood expectations and looking at the practical realities of 17th and 18th century sailing vessels. When we examine the evidence, descriptions from those who encountered pirates, sketches and paintings from the era, court records from trials, a far different picture emerges. Not fantasy and adventure, but hard-working sailors in utilitarian clothing, with perhaps a few lucky ones displaying stolen finery when ashore. This is the true story of pirate clothing and gear. Everyday clothing. Pirates dressed like all mariners of their age. When aboard ship, they wore practical, hard-wearing garments identical to ordinary sailors. The most common materials were wool and linen. Wool held warmth when wet, which was essential in Atlantic and Caribbean spray and rain. Linen was lighter for warmer months. Seamen favored broadcloth for its quality, kersey for durability, shag for sturdiness, Welsh plains resembling flannel, and cotton, an inexpensive woolen cloth. Trousers were loose and baggy, cut between knee and ankle, a style standard since the 1500s. The loose fit allowed freedom of movement for climbing rigging and hauling lines. Extra material protected against rain and spray. Short length prevented tangling in ropes and tackle. Shirts were tight at the body, but open at the neck. Fitted fabric prevented billowing that could catch on rigging when sailors worked in tight quarters high above deck. Shirts stayed tucked because seamen wore no underwear. Most sailors went barefoot. Bare feet gripped slippery, wet decks better than shoes, and provided purchase on rope ladders. Before the Industrial Revolution, clothing was extraordinarily expensive. Most sailors owned only one outfit, wearing it constantly until it rotted off their bodies. This meant pirates and sailors had no choice in wardrobe. Durability and practicality were not preferences, but necessities. Clothes were functional first and last. Stolen finery. While pirates dressed practically at sea, they possessed one advantage ordinary sailors could never claim: access to stolen clothing. When merchant vessels were captured, their cargo included fine fabrics and finished garments destined for wealthy merchants and colonial aristocracy. After plunder was seized and shares divided, the quartermaster held an auction at the main mast. The most coveted items were not always coins or weapons, but clothes. Elaborate garments commanded high prices with fierce bidding. Money went into the ship's common stock for supplies at friendly ports. This allowed pirates to accumulate fine garments they would wear ashore to display wealth and status. Aboard ship, however, pirates reverted to practical working clothes. Elegant vests and silk breeches stayed in sea chests. Only when docking would transformation occur. Out came fine linen shirts with lace, white stockings rolled above the knee with ribbon garters, and tight woven breeches buttoned below the knees. A pirate might look the gentleman or successful merchant walking through colonial taverns. The contrast between shabby appearance at sea and fashionable attire ashore was striking and deliberate. These clothes announced success. They declared that this man had taken prizes, had wealth, had power, and was not someone to be crossed. Captain's dress and appearance. Pirate captains occupied a different relationship with clothing than ordinary crew members. A captain's share of plunder was double that of regular sailors, giving him resources and motivation to dress distinctively. Some captains wore long coats taken from captives or purchased at ports. Colorful silks and feathered hats became markers of success and authority. The most famous example was Bartholomew Roberts, known as Black Bart. The French called him Le Joli Rouge, the pretty red, because of his scarlet silk coat and matching damask waistcoat. Roberts was probably the most successful pirate of the Golden Age, and he made certain everyone knew it. He wore a great gold necklace with a diamond-encrusted cross looted from Portuguese ships. At his death in battle, he wore a rich crimson damask waistcoat and breeches, a red feather in his hat, and 2 pairs of pistols slung over his seat holders. Roberts had carefully cultivated an image of power and success. The striking colors, expensive fabrics, jewelry, and feathered hat announced to crew and enemies alike that here stood a man of wealth, power, and authority. Blackbeard, Edward Teach, famously wore lit matchsticks stuck under his hat during battle, creating smoke around his face that made him appear demonic and invincible. Calico Jack Rackham earned his nickname from distinctive calico shirts he wore while pirating. These men understood that clothing was a weapon. A carefully constructed image could impress a crew, terrify enemies, and make men surrender rather than fight. For pirate captains, fashion was strategy, accessories and adornments. Beyond basic garments, pirates wore various accessories serving practicing and psychological purposes. Silk sashes worn across the shoulder held pistols and other items. Small pieces of rope called lanyards tied to sashes prevented folding knives from being lost in battle. Pistols attached to sashes with cords could be dropped after firing without loss, freeing hands for swords or cutlasses. Wide supportive belts protected the back during heavy labor. Cloth sashes worn under belts absorbed sweat during hot Caribbean work. Scarves worn on the head protected against intense tropical sun. Neckcloths tied around the head became bandanas, providing protection and perspiration absorption. There is scholarly debate about how common sashes were among common pirates. Pictorial evidence is limited. Officers wore sashes, which makes sense given that sash wearing was sta andard among military officers generally. But documentation of common seamen wearing them is sparse. Nevertheless, sashes appeared in written accounts, and were clearly part of the outfit for some pirates, particularly those in authority or who had plunder to purchase fine accessories. Hats and headgear. The tricorn hat is the most iconic piece of pirate headwear in modern imagination. Yet historical reality is far more complicated. Tricorns existed during the Golden Age, but didn't become popular among seamen until the 1730s. On land, they were fashionable, but aboard ship, they were deeply impractical. The large pointed front brim obstructed vision precisely when needed, when ducking under swinging rigging and tackle blocks on heaving decks. Tricorns caught on things, knocked against rigging, and channeled rainwater into the wearer's face. Despite modern depictions, there's no strong evidence pirate captains actually wore them at sea. Former privateers like Captain Kidd and Stede Bonnet may have, but these were unusual men with more land experience. For average pirate captains, other headgear proved more practical. Backward-facing cocked hats were peculiar to seamen and appear frequently in contemporary pictures. They kept the front open for visibility while protecting the top of the head. Round hats, basically cocked hats without folded sides, were equally popular. Monmouth caps were small woolen hats fitted closely to the head. Montero caps had small peaks with sides that folded down for cold weather. Most distinctive to seamen was the thrum cap, made from shaggy wool or fur. Incredibly warm, waterproof, and designed not to blow off in strong winds, the thrum cap was practical perfection for sea life. Female pirates like Anne Bonny and Mary Read often wore handkerchiefs tied about their heads, large rectangular pieces that functioned as bandanas. Myths about eye patches and earrings. Pirates are famous for gold earrings and eye patches, neither of which were common among mariners during the golden age of piracy. The pirate earring myth persists because of a romantic theory that seamen wore earrings to keep gold aside for burial expenses. If a sailor died ashore, he could pay for a proper burial. In reality, this practice was extremely rare. In 17th and 18th century maritime life, wearing earrings was regarded as effeminate and was not socially acceptable for working seamen. The eye patch is equally mythical in origin. While some pirates may have worn them due to actual eye injuries, ropes and tackle could swing dangerously. There is little historical evidence eye patches were common. Sun exposure during navigation when seamen stared through sighting instruments could also cause lost vision. However, in pirate culture, scars were badges of honor. A missing eye or scarred face demonstrated long experience at sea. A pirate might show his injury with pride rather than covering it with a patch. The glorified image of the eye patch pirate appears to be largely a product of later artistic representations and adventure fiction rather than historical fact. Female pirates and cross-dressing. Female pirates faced unique challenges regarding clothing and identity aboard ship. Anne Bonny, Mary Read, and others who sailed under pirate flags had to disguise themselves as male to survive in exclusively male environments. Their clothing was not fashionable or glamorous, just practical, hard-wearing male sailors' garments. Some sources suggest Anne Bonny and Mary Read eventually revealed their true gender to trusted crew members, particularly to each other. But they continued to wear male clothing and dress, fight, drink, and work exactly like the men around them. Female pirates dressed like men, not as temporary disguise, but as practical necessity. Confined ship quarters, physically demanding work, constant presence of numerous men, all of this meant that standing out through dress or behavior could be fatal. Historical accounts suggest female pirates were ruthless and effective. They participated in raids, fought in battles, and performed the same violent work as male counterparts. Their clothing reflected the reality. There is no evidence they wore corsets, flowing skirts, or romanticized costumes shown in modern films. Hollywood has created an image of female pirates as daring adventurers in exotic dress, but the historical reality was far more austere. These were women who lived as men aboard ship because that was the only way they could survive in a violent, male-dominated world. And there you have it, the true story of pirate clothing and gear. Not flowing silks and tricorn hats aboard ship, but practical wool and linen working clothes. Not constant displays of finery, but stolen goods saved for ashore. Not the Hollywood fantasy, but the reality of working seamen who happen to break the law. The next time you see a pirate in a film or painting, remember that the real pirate Lykel, I looked far more like an ordinary sailor than the romantic figure on screen.